Right, so just to start, I want to say that I'll be streaming on Twitch very soon. It'll just be some generic shit to start off with, but if any of you are into that sort of thing, I'll leave a link in the description. Anyway, 10 real fights that happen backstage in WWE. Wrestlers have to put so much faith in each other in order to do their job safely, so when you hear about a fight breaking out backstage, it's normally very shocking because you also learn a huge amount about the wrestlers that you never knew before. Sometimes you can understand why they did it, sometimes a wrestler turns out to be completely different to how you thought they were. Either way, it's very interesting to learn about, so let's look at some of these conflicts that took place and let me know what you think about them in the comments. Number 10. So this first story comes from an old school wrestler called David Schultz, and David Schultz was approached backstage at a wrestling show by a news reporter. This news reporter was investigating whether or not professional wrestling was real, and so he says to David, "I think wrestling's fake." Now, David is not only a man with a temper, but someone whose sole purpose in life at this stage is protecting the business and making sure that anyone outside of the wrestling bubble believed that it was 100% real. So this is where things took a turn and got physical. He screamed, "Irish whip!" and grabbed the news reporter by the arm, but nothing happened. Alright. Hang on. Spanish fly. Okay, might have a point. Thankfully, the conflict was solved there and then, and they moved their separate ways. Number 9. So, this one took place back in 2008. It was before a live show. All the wrestlers were just in the change room, getting ready for their matches and whatever else, when all of a sudden, a dog walked in. And this caused a lot of commotion. A lot of people were freaking out, like, "Oh, what the fuck? Why the fuck is this dog here? What the fuck? How the fuck?" They were kind of, some of them were a bit scared of the dog, and they started to argue with each other over how to get rid of it, and what it's doing here, and you know, some of them were really, really taken aback by the fact that this dog had walked into the locker room, and for some reason, it caused a lot of tension. And in the midst of all this madness, it was actually Finlay who turned around to every single person in that locker room and said, "Here, this dog has done nothing wrong. This is an innocent animal, a beautiful animal, and these are the sort of animals that we need to protect, we need to look after." And he calmed everyone down and breastfed the dog in front of everyone. Absolute legend. Fair play to Finlay. Number 8. So this one comes from 2007. It was an angle where Vince McMahon was supposed to walk down the corridor past the entire roster before entering his limo, only for the limo to explode in front of everyone. The problem was that for some reason, while the rest of the roster looked on in concern, Paul London kept smiling the entire time. This caused a huge fight between Vince McMahon and Paul London, with many people assuming that Paul London did it because he thought the entire angle was stupid, but in fact, he was interviewed about this fight and claimed that the real reason he kept smiling was because they practiced the explosion earlier in the day with a crew member in the limo, and he burned alive in the explosion, which Paul thought was really funny. Number 7. This is a more well-known story that took place over a decade ago. JBL, of course, is a known bully backstage in WWE who has caused several of these fights, none of these fights being more prolific than the time he decided to bully Joey Styles, only for it to blow back in his face. Basically, one day when they were on tour, Joey Styles decided that he had had enough, and when JBL tried to slag him off, he just slapped the shit out of him. Then a few of JBL's friends tried to stick up for him, so he just slapped them too. Then a few more people tried to calm him down, so he just slapped them too. Then he noticed a few fans had actually just witnessed this event, so he slapped them also. He actually slapped quite a few people now that I mention it. Number 6. We go from one JBL story to another. This one happened quite recently. JBL was backstage squaring up to Shane Thorne of all people. He was like, "Oh, what are you, some sort of big Aussie bitch?" To which Shane Thorne responded with, "At least I'm not a scoobert doobert." What? What you just call me? A Don't repeat it, said Ryback, who was also at this event for some reason. "That's not cool, Shane. You shouldn't be saying things like that to people." Shane apologised while JBL cried and used this as a life lesson to become a much better person. Number 5. This happened around a year ago and doesn't seem to be talked about very much, but basically Heath Slater was backstage in the change room before a show, and he was just minding his own business until he looked over and noticed that Cassius Ohno was on the other side of the room, and he went to say hello, but after saying hello, he noticed very quickly that Cassius Ohno was eating toothpaste directly out of the tube. He said, "Are you alright, man?" "Yeah, grand, yeah." "Are you sure? Cause it's okay if you're not, like." "No, I'm grand, yeah." And while it didn't come to blows, it certainly did raise the tension in the room, as no words were exchanged beyond this point, and he kept spilling toothpaste on people's bags, which pissed a few people off. In the end, Cassius Ohno left the room without saying a word, but unfortunately his locker opened on the way out and all the toothpaste boxes fell out. Number 4, this is our third JBL story, and again, it's another recent one which took place just before that altercation with Shane Thorne. Basically, an anonymous wrestler who had just lost their title was sitting dejected outside their hotel room with tears streaming down her face. JBL noticed her as he walked onto his hotel room and immediately told her everything he had to say. This is the problem with young wrestlers nowadays. You lose one match, you lose one title, and you start crying. You are so lucky that you never had to share a locker room with me and the boys back in the day, because if you did, you'd be torn to fucking shreds. You little bitch. I'm actually embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to be employed by the same company as you. I'm embarrassed to have even one thing remotely in common with you. You are so soft, so fragile, such a pussy, that in all honesty, you've redefined what it means to be a professional wrestler for the worst. And now other wrestlers from your generation are going to suffer as a result. She's crying because her ma died. Oh. Number 3. Back in 2006, Vince McMahon decided to bring back ECW as a third brand, with the original ECW owner Paul Heyman as the man in charge of creative. However, Heyman never had the final say, and this caused a lot of tension between the two, which boiled over in the early days of the new show, with Heyman saying, "You can't bring back ECW and have it be Raw or SmackDown Light. It has to be ECW. If it's not Extreme and it doesn't have any ECW originals, then the fans won't accept it and it'll die a death." To which Vince responded with, "What about Batista versus Big Show in the Hammerstein Ballroom?" To which Paul Heyman responded with, "That's perfect." And it put an end to the beef between the two, and ECW became a massive success, ending with Ezekiel Jackson as champion 4 years later, just as Heyman had requested. Number 2. This goes back to WrestleMania a few years ago, the time that Braun Strowman teamed up with a child called Nicholas and won the Raw Tag Team titles. Initially, when this was pitched, the Revival objected to it quite strongly. They claimed that it made a mockery of the tag team division that they spent their careers trying to build, and that a child shouldn't be in possession of one of the most prestigious titles in the company. However, the match went ahead exactly as it was planned, with Braun and Nicholas walking out victorious, and it was a huge success. The match was great, the fans loved it, they went backstage and got a standing ovation. Even the Revival showed up afterwards to Nicholas and they beat the shit out of him. Number 1. This is a more well-known story, but an interesting one nonetheless. Back in 2003, Chris Jericho was in the locker room with Goldberg when Goldberg started giving it the big man. And Chris Jericho started squaring up to Goldberg as a result of this, and the entire locker room watched on, just egging them on, like, fight, 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 fight. So they did, and they started to wrestle, and to the surprise of everyone, Chris Jericho actually got the upper hand. And then he ripped Goldberg's eyes completely out, and they were like, "Oh no, what the fuck, oh god, oh god." And they ran out of the room. Then Angel Garza walked in and he was like, "What the fuck?" Then Chris Jericho ripped Goldberg's head off with his bare hands and went, "Jadad!" and fucking booted it down the hall. So he did. And that's the end of the video. These stories were all taken off a source that I trust. He wasn't actually there, but he told me to trust him, and that he wouldn't lie to me. He lied to me, didn't he?